Hello again. I will readily admit that I am finding the keenness which some people in this country are exhibiting to invite Ukrainians into their homes vastly entertaining. That's something of a confession, and I know that I shouldn't. I'm perfectly well aware that Schadenfreude is not a particularly attractive thing to display, but there. These people, who would not have dreamt of opening their homes to an Ethiopian or Nigerian refugee, are of course racists who are judging the character of people based purely upon the colour of their skin. This is a bad move. It is not so much skin colour which should be the chief factor in assessing a stranger, but rather their cultural origins and historic traditions. Ethnicity may well play a role in the behaviour of individuals, but heritage and family upbringing is more important. Consider the case of Sweden. I lived in Göteborg briefly in 1978 after I married a Swedish woman. It was the quietest, dullest place you ever saw in your life, which is why I cut and ran after a few months and returned to the Middle East. These days, the area where I lived in the city, Gamlestad, is famous for shootings and bombings. Sweden has the highest rate of gun crime in the whole of Europe. What caused this terrible violence, which has transformed the country from a peaceful land of tolerance and calm? That would be Albanian gangsters who settled there, of course, as refugees and asylum seekers from the war in former Yugoslavia. In a description to this video, I give a link to a paper from 1994 which tells how Sweden offered asylum to tens of thousands of Albanians from Kosovo. Just like the situation today, in fact. Readers may, if they wish, Google Sweden and gun crime to see how that ended. Of course, many of the people who were offered asylum at that time, in the early 90s, turned out to be gangsters and other criminals, while quite a few had fought in the vicious wars that were going on in Yugoslavia. They soon began behaving in Sweden just as they had in Kosovo and Serbia, and before long they were importing guns and explosives from the Balkans. We might bear this in mind in this country when we are offering asylum to people from another war in Eastern Europe. Boston, in the English county of Lincolnshire, used to be a pleasant and quiet town. By 2016, it was the murder capital of Britain, with more murders than anywhere else in the whole country. I give a link to a piece about this in the description to this video. What was generating this violence, do you think? It was linked to the rise in numbers of foreign-born residents, almost all from Romania. The murders were, and are, committed by people with Eastern European names. The problem in both Boston and Swedish cities like Stockholm and Göteborg is not black people. It is in the main those who are white. The trouble is caused not by their genetic inheritance, but rather by the way that they have been brought up and the customs in their countries of origin. The problem is that their children absorb these same traditions, and so members of such families never really get how English and Swedish people behave. They see them very often as soft touches and mugs. This is the problem with racial prejudice, and I've spoken about this before. Even if it is true, and I think that it may well be the case, that there are variations in intellectual ability and things like testosterone levels between those from sub-Saharan Africa, Europe and East Asia, this does not allow me to make any judgments about a stranger whom I meet based solely upon the colour of his or her skin. Of far more importance is the country in which this person grew up, the family religion, social status and things such as that. This is why those who are mad keen on letting loads of Ukrainians come to Britain are in for a dreadful shock. The professionals in Ukraine, the doctors, architects, scientists, teachers and so on, will remain, hoping to weather the storm. After all, they have decent enough lives there, and even if the Russians did occupy the country, things probably wouldn't change too much for the worse for them. The ones who flee will tend to be those lower down the social scale, people who hope for a better life and more opportunities in Britain. Then too, anybody with a child with learning difficulties or who has a rare disease which needs expensive treatment will wish to come here simply for the schools and the National Health Service. Drifters and criminals will be keen to come to a country where they can make a new start as well. This is precisely what happened in Sweden when they allowed all those Albanian asylum seekers from the war in Yugoslavia to settle in their country. There is no reason at all to suppose that it will be any different now with the Ukrainian asylum seekers from a war in their country.